My guest on the show today is Neil deMause. He's a Brooklyn-based journalist and co-author of the book Field of Schemes, as well as the Stadium News website fieldofschemes.com. I'm super excited to talk to Neil. I'm going to start with a weird thing that a journalist by the name of David Feller dug out of a publication in the 1960s. I'm just going to read it, and then I hope Neil can just pick up from there. And it starts, "Otherwise, it is clear that professional sports are a natural monopoly, marked by definite peculiarities both in the structure and in the functioning of their markets. Consequently, professional leagues have every economic ground to appeal to legislatures, to courts, and to the public on the ground that we fail if you divide us, we stand if Johnny unite us." I think that just goes right to the core of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of things that come together to create the current sports business complex. But clearly the fact that the monopoly power of leagues is a huge, huge factor.
And your book Field of Schemes goes into that in great depth. And can you kind of outline what the book's about, where it goes, all that kind of fun stuff?
I mean, this all began when my co-author Joanna Kagan and I started researching stadiums when this was mid-'90s, and the New York Yankees were talking about building a new stadium at that time in Manhattan, and the Cleveland Browns had just left Cleveland for Baltimore, and Cleveland was building a new stadium to get a new Browns team in place. And in both cases, Joanna's from Cleveland originally, I'm from New York, and we were sort of like, wow, isn't this a funny coincidence that, two different cities are, with huge budget problems, they're closing libraries and, have schools, school budget cuts and things like that, are both talking about devoting money to sports stadiums. And of course, as, we quickly found out, and as I think hopefully everyone now knows, this is something that goes on, pretty much in every large and small city in the U.S. And one of the things we quickly found out was that, the question of what's the benefit that cities get from these stadiums, is it something where, well, at least they get to keep teams and, there's a huge economic benefit from this? No, not particularly. The teams have sort of been perpetuating this myth that, in order to be a major league city, you have to have major league sports, and you have to kowtow to whatever our demands are because we're the leagues and we can put teams wherever we want to. Oftentimes that threat is an idle one. Teams threaten to move, I would say, about 10 times more than they actually move, at least. But it's, as you implied with that quote, it's the threat that sort of underlies all of this. We're the sports league. If we can take away your team if we don't want, if we want to. So therefore, you better give us what we want.
I've been talking to a couple people and telling them who you are and saying I'm excited to have you on, and they say, does this happen in soccer? Does this happen in MLS? And I'm like, well, we could talk about Chester or Harrison, but
yeah.
I mean, can you tell us how MLS works with this whole thing?
More and more, I think, is the answer. I think when MLS first got started, it didn't. The threat of, hey, we're not going to give you an MLS team if you don't give us money, was the sort of thing that didn't get city mayors and city councils all that excited, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And
then David Beckham arrived?
Yeah, I mean, to its credit, MLS is getting bigger and getting more popular and, has a better product, certainly compared to where it was a few years ago. So, it's the sort of thing that now will get a little bit more attention. So instead of seeing teams building stadiums for, say $50 million and the city might provide a little free land, now we're talking about things like this DC United plan where it's going to be closer to $300 million for the land plus the construction costs. And the city is going to put up half the money, more than half the money. No one's really quite sure because it's got this weird, you can call it a profit-sharing plan. It's a profit-sharing plan that if there's windfall profits for the team, they share it with the city. On the other hand, it's a guaranteed profit plan in that if the profits fall short for DC United, then the city is going to have to kick back tax revenues to make that up.
I mean, for me, I looked at that number initially, and I saw the stadium. They were projecting the stadium cost at 150 million, and the stadium in the picture didn't look like a 150 million-dollar stadium. Can you? I mean, am I right to suspect that? Is there? Why are they? Why does that number seem so underinflated?
You know, I think that you're saying it looked low or it looked high.
It said it looked. I mean, I seemed like that stadium in the picture looked like more than 150 million bucks. I mean,
You know, it depends on what they're actually going to build. You know, and they're not. I don't think they're clear there on how much it's going to go for, how much what the capacity is going to be initially, and so much of stadium cost has to do with stuff you can't see. You know, it's the how nice the television sets are and the luxury boxes and things like that. That I don't think you can necessarily tell just from looking at a rendering. Certainly how much stuff is going to cost. I mean, just putting up seats is cheap. I remember somebody, this is probably 10, 15 years ago at this point, saying that to rebuild Wrigley Field, say, as it was built in 1914, would cost maybe $100 million. And, clearly the Chicago Cubs are about to spend a lot more than that on redoing Wrigley Field, but that's because they're not just going to be redoing it as it was originally built. They're going to be adding all these 21st century bells and whistles. So it really depends on how much you're putting into this sort of the interior of the building, for the sorts of things that sports teams think that fans want these days, which isn't just a chair to sit in and watch the game.
Yep. I was reading somewhere and it probably was somewhere on your site or one of your tweets that Chester PA residents basically had the income of a Caribbean nation, income level of a Caribbean nation. And the deal that was struck with MLS represented about 25% of their average income to get that stadium done. Is that accurate?
I don't remember that stat particularly, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Chester is a small, poor town outside Philadelphia, and I think the idea here was, well, we're going to get on the map by getting Major League Soccer, and I guess they may have gotten on the map. I don't see that it's really helped them all that much. People come into town, spend their money at the soccer game, and then leave. Same way that it happens in Harrison, New Jersey. Same way it happens in Bridgeview, Illinois. It's again a way that sports owners hook cities, and I think MLS have been pretty good at appealing to these sort of small, poor, sort of suburban cities, and saying, hey, maybe you can't get a baseball or a football team, but you can get a soccer team.
Right.
The problem is there just isn't the benefit.
Now? Last I checked, Harrison was having problems collecting taxes from from the New York Red Bulls. Do you know if that's still going on?
I think they had gotten to some sort of agreement on the taxes. I think they finally resolved it, but I'd have to go back and check, to be honest with you. I mean, the big problem with Harrison is that they spent all this money on. They're going to spend all this money on redoing the Path train station there, which it desperately needs. I've gone to Red Bulls games, and it can take 45 minutes just to get into the train station when you're leaving the game because it's so under capacity. And they're going to do all this stuff, and it's going to be great for Red Bulls and great for fans going to Red Bulls games. But there's still nothing in Harrison,
right.
And I don't think there's going to be a whole lot in Harrison.
I mean, I always handed it to MLS Harrison is one of the birthplaces of American soccer. I mean, it's a great legacy to have a stadium in there around Kearney and around some of those towns that really gave birth to professional soccer in the United States almost 100 years ago now. But it seems as though they're not capitalizing it, and perhaps part of that is calling it a New York team instead of a New Jersey team. And New Jersey has a soccer legacy that's second to no one, so that's the thing that gets weird.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens when the New York team starts in 2 years, right? And at that point, are Red Bulls fans in New York going to jump ship and go and become, NYCFC fans? I think if the Brooklyn Nets experience shows anything, it's probably yes, because I didn't think that the Nets were going to really catch on. I was like, New York is a Knicks town. There's, the Nets are going to take years and years before they really build a fan base. But I'd forgotten about the fact that in New York, there are an awful lot of people who are not from New York, didn't grow up as Knicks fans because they grew up somewhere else. And they jumped on board with the Nets, if they live in Brooklyn. And, I think there will probably be a whole lot of people, especially since the Red Bulls don't have the long history of the Knicks. there are going to be a lot of people who are going to jump over and become, NYCFC fans, and that is going to be interesting for what do the Red Bulls do. They keep branding themselves as New York. Probably. Do they, try to incorporate more New Jersey centric stuff in there? Maybe. Although the history of New Jersey branded sports teams is not good, I have to say.
So let's jump from there then to the New York stuff. Now, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I would trust you, but MLS, and I think we maybe had this discussion. MLS spent more money lobbying the New York City government last year than any other entity, and on Corona Park, and apparently Corona Park is, for all intents and purposes, dead. Is that a decent read?
Yeah, I think that's a decent read. I don't think it was all for naught. I mean, they got their foot in the door and they managed to establish some relationships with city government. But yeah, they spent an awful lot of time and energy trying to get Flushing Meadows Corona Park in Queens, right next to the Met Stadium and where the tennis center is, to get a plot of land in that park for a soccer stadium, and they just could not do it. There was just too much community opposition. That park has been really carved up for a lot of private uses, and there was a lot of concern about that, and they weren't. It doesn't look like able to get the local elected officials on board, which is what they needed to do. So they backed off, and they've partnered with the Yankees now, and I think they haven't said they're going back to square one, but I think everybody who's been following this assumes that they're going back to square one in terms of looking for a site. So who knows where it's going to be? I mean, there aren't a lot of big plots of land open in New York City, which is why they were focused on the park. But I think everyone involved would be shocked at this point if they went back to Queens and started pushing for that, because they're going to run into a ton of opposition. In fact, now the tennis center is giving some money, seed money. I think it's $10 million to create a conservancy for Flushing Meadows Corona Park, like Central Park and Prospect Park have. And once that's set up, I think it's be very difficult to try and push through any kind of stadium deals on public parkland.
Way to go, tennis!
Well, had to do it in order to get the approval for the expansion. So, and to their credit, I mean, I think they're doing it well, and they seem, the parks advocates and the community folks seem to be happy with the deal that they cut. But that's really the importance of that sort of community activism is, if there hadn't been people in Queens pushing back, then tennis would have just said, the USTA would have just said, okay, fine, we're going to expand here. Here's our proposal. Okay, give us a little. It wasn't a lot. It was like another half acre of land or something like that. But here's what we want to do, and appeal to the city, and the city would say okay. But because there was a lot of pushback, they really had to actually kick in some stuff for the community, which is to their credit. And could soccer have tried to work out something like that? Conceivably, but it just did not seem like it was going to happen. So, at this point, if Randy Levine from the Yankees is running things, who knows what's going to go on, because this is a guy who's a former deputy mayor and, pretty much masterminded the Yankees' plans for a new stadium, and the way he operated with that was totally under the radar. We're going to meet with city officials and everybody, important to get this signed off on for years, and then we're going to announce it. So I would not be at all surprised to see that that's the way it's going to happen. We're going to hear sort of vague rumors for a couple of years, and then suddenly there'll be a press conference, and it'll be, okay, we worked it all out. The soccer stadium is going here. Point to a spot on the map.
What if MLS is strong enough to hold some legislatures hostage, but not quite strong enough to hold New York's?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. I mean, Levine is very well connected, and he will be the one who can figure out how to play the politics there. I think it's the issue is going to be finding a place where the opposition is not strong. I think the city government is going to be, you come in, you want to build a soccer stadium, or really any kind of big development project, and I think obviously depends on who the new mayor is next year. But most city mayors in New York have not been averse to, okay, you want to do a big development project. Okay, fine. Here's all the approvals. The issue is going to be finding a place where there isn't, a lot of opposition, or a lot of organized opposition.
Exactly.
And, we'll see. I mean, I think it could be a while, I mean, I don't know if it'll be as long as DC United spent looking for a stadium, but or I should say has so far spent looking for a stadium because we don't know if this Buzzard Point plan is going to go through. But I think the idea is MLS is taking the long view here and thinking, okay, you know what? We've got an owner who wants to come in, who wants a team. We don't have a stadium site yet. Normally, we would say, okay, you're not getting the team unless the stadium deal is in place. But this is New York. We want a team sooner than later in this market, and actually in the market, not in New Jersey. We've got an owner. Fine, let's go for it. We'll work out the rest later.
So how do you see? I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Cosmos at this point. Are you seeing them pulling any efforts, and are they mounting any kind of arm twisting effort like MLS is? Or can they be a player in this? Or
I don't think they have the arm twisting power. I mean, MLS is already sort of barely on the sports radar in New York. They're probably ahead of the WNBA, but they're behind. No,
I know.
I mean, and I'm not saying this is a criticism. Every time I say something like this, soccer fans say, "But it's great." I'm like, "Yeah, it is great."
Oh, and it's not like soccer isn't huge in New York. I mean, I know that's the problem I get with people is that you can say MLS isn't reaching the market, but it's not that soccer isn't reaching the market.
Absolutely, no. But the MLS is they're slowly growing, and they are where they are. But it's not like you ever would pick up the New York Post or the Daily News and see a soccer headline on the back page.
Yeah.
Certainly not an MLS headline. I doubt you would see any kind of soccer headline, to be honest, unless they held the World Cup here. And when I say here, I mean in New York. If they held the World Cup somewhere else in the U.S., it probably still wouldn't qualify.
I think you're probably right.
But I mean, so basically, if MLS is sort of barely on the radar, the Cosmos are, their name notwithstanding, way, way off the radar. So I don't really see them as having a whole lot of leverage. It's possible they might make something happen, but it's not like they are the first people who City Hall kowtows to.
Understood. Okay, so let's take the leap to my little world, which is you follow me a little on Twitter. I am a diehard promotion relegation supporter in sports, and from what I've seen, it looks to me like this phenomenon that we're talking about, where the arm twisting and the hostage holding of legislatures and cities spending ridiculous amounts of money and pulling money out of libraries, pulling money out of schools. This seems like it's a creature of our system a little bit, and not so much a creature of the open league system, and not happening in some of the European countries where these soccer clubs are frankly as big or bigger than NFL teams.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's not. It's the size of the teams and the popularity of the league, but it's that plus the monopoly power. It's the fact that when the Yankees wanted a new stadium, they could say, "Hey, there's only 30 teams in Major League Baseball, and if we leave, you're not getting another one." Not that the Yankees were going to leave New York, but they could say that, and it was a threat in the back of people's minds. Whereas if Man U were to say that, I mean,
I can't think of an example of a big top-flight soccer team anywhere in the world that just threatened to leave their community.
Because you can't, because Manchester could just go and get another team, and I mean,
right.
People would be happy, but they could build it up and have a top-flight team, or let's put it another way, let's say that Major League Baseball operated with promotion and relegation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Yankees left New York for Charlotte, North Carolina because they were crazy, I mean, whatever. Then, New York would just say, okay, fine. Who wants to own a soccer team? Who wants to own a baseball team in New York? And somebody would step up and they would start a team and, work their way up very quickly because they would have all the media power of, all the money power from the media market of New York. And should be able to build themselves up to a top flight team pretty quickly. So no, it's promotion and relegation is a huge safety valve for getting out of this sort of threat culture. Just because you have you don't have the monopoly of, okay, we get to decide who's in the league. It's the teams that decide who's in what league, the team's performance, and that's monumental. And again, not to say there aren't all sorts of problems with economics and problems with equity and things like that between teams in European soccer, but it really, really, really blunts that threat of you're going to be without us, and that's the threat for everything. I mean, it's we're going to leave and fans will be upset. We're going to leave. It'll hurt your economy. We're going to leave and it's not that we've never seen public money going into sports facilities in other countries, but I think there's absolutely a reason why the U.S. is the undisputed king of this, and that's because you have the ability to pose that threat. And I would say on the flip side, I think you have more of a culture of putting public money into private facilities, whether it's for sports, whether it's for auto plants, whether it's for whatever. Local governments are way more prone, especially in the last 30 years in the U.S., to see their business as being, spending money on helping promote private development in a way that you don't see in other countries and in a way that you don't see in Canada. I mean, Canada doesn't have promotion and relegation for any sports that I can think of. But Canada doesn't have nearly the level of subsidies as the U.S., although it's growing. And I think part of that just has to do with the political culture there, that's just not considered acceptable to hand over tons of tax money to pay for a facility for a pro sports team, whereas in the U.S. it's, oh, well, of course, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? It's like, oh, if you want to have business in your community, you got to make it worth our while. There's tons of evidence at this point that it's the ways that corporations make siting decisions of where they're going to open a computer chip plant or something like that has way less to do with the kind of subsidies they receive than with where they actually want to be. If there's a place that's a terrible place to open a computer chip plant because the level of education among the workforce isn't good, or the roads are terrible, or the schools are awful, and so therefore the people who own the place are afraid to send their kids to this local schools. Somebody throwing $100 million at you is not going to make a difference. You're still not going to go there. On the other hand, if there's a place you want to go to and you say, hey, you're going to make it worth our while, and they offer you $100 million, you'd be very happy to take the $100 million to do what you already wanted to do.
Now, one of the arguments I get about promotion relegation, and one of the common ones, is that these cities, after they invest so much in one of these stadiums for one of these teams, they don't, it's not in their interest to support a promotion relegation system either. I mean, who wants to risk that investment, and you might get relegated and you might be second division, and this could be a horrible thing. Do you think that's a real effect?
There's something to that, especially if you're sort of in a smaller market, for one of the big leagues. But I don't think that's what's stopping it. I mean, I think it's so hard to untangle, all the corporate ownership and what you're buying when you're buying a Major League Sports franchise.
Yep.
Buying literally a franchise of a major corporation, and that includes the fact that you're getting sort of a share of a limited something there's a limited quantity of. And I think that somebody who bought any sports team really would scream bloody murder if they said, wait a minute, we spent $500 million to buy this team, and suddenly you're saying that some guy who bought the Louisville Redbirds get into this league not by paying $500 million, but just by getting some better players and winning a bunch of games. What are you, crazy? Oh, it's a very, very different way of structuring sports. And I think it would be, awesome in a lot of ways if you could have promotion and relegation in a lot of American leagues. But, in the same way that, there's all sorts of things sort of baked into like the TV contract here that are really hard to untangle when you suddenly decide, oh, wouldn't it be nice for people to be able to watch games of their home team on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of stuff that's really baked into the ownership structure of sports that is going to be very, very hard to change once you have a sports league in place. I think the time to do promotion and relegation was when MLS started, unfortunately. And MLS probably could do it a lot more easily than some of the more established long-term leagues. Only if it's if only because it's a single entity structure, and they could try to do that at this point. Probably would have to do it in conjunction with a lot of expansion, so that the teams that are currently at the bottom of the barrel wouldn't have to fear they'd be too far at the bottom of the barrel, because they would think, okay, we're 20th now, but they're bringing in another 10 teams, so at least
Yep.
we'll,
No, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I would love to. I would love to find a way to do that. My plan, actually, I've got a plan that splits the U.S. into two pyramids, and then fills it with new teams, which then should insulate the current MLS teams from relegation, and give them another 10 years of legacy in the process, giving them 25 years, which at that point you would think that would be enough to for survival. I mean, that's about as much advantage as you can possibly give them, it seems to me. But
it's totally possible. That sounds great. It's totally possible to do if your goal is having a fairly run sports league. Unfortunately, the people who are making these decisions, who are in charge of MLS, that's not their main concern. And you understand why it wouldn't.
Well, fairness and profit don't always go together, do they?
Yeah, no. I mean, but they're running a business, and if you
Right.
have a monopoly, why would you ever give it up?
Exactly.
I can't think of any monopolies that have ever voluntarily given up their monopoly.
Exactly.
And
I mean,
yeah, I don't know what you do about that at this point. I don't, unless I don't see Congress stepping in and saying, okay. I mean, I guess that would be the other way you could do it in the other sports leagues, right? If Congress ever really sort of got its gumption up and said, you know what, we're really sick and tired of, say, Major League Baseball playing everybody and saying, you can't have a team, or football saying you can't have a team in Los Angeles. If you don't do some sort of, promotion relegation system, we're going to strip your antitrust exemption or something like that.
it was always my understanding that Oliver Wendell Holmes, or one of those old justices, said, well, baseball gets antitrust because they're a game and not a business. And
Right.
at this point, I mean, when does that become so absurd that they have to do something about that?
Oh, it was absurd in 1922 when it was first ruled, but they don't have to do anything about it. Basically, the courts keep kicking it back to Congress and saying, okay, if Congress wants to do something about it, they can. And also, the sports leagues have been very, very good about making sure that nothing that would seriously challenge their antitrust exemption ever gets to the courts. And Congress is, what's the best way of putting this? Easy buy. I mean,
It's so easy to bash Congress. It's almost not fun.
if you want Congress to not do something, it's pretty easy to from doing it, right? You just lobby enough to throw roadblocks and make sure that the thing doesn't happen.
Yeah, inactivity it costs a lot, but it's relatively easy.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I think there are certainly paths to improving pro sports in this country, but and MLS in particular. But I think it's going to take an awful lot more outside pressure than we've seen, even inklings of, because pro sports are not going to reform themselves. It's working great for them.
Mm-hmm. Let me throw this question at you then, since we're practically there. One of my cockamamie theories is that in the U.S. pro sports system, it doesn't really, and no matter what sport you're talking to, but especially soccer, it doesn't accommodate unlimited teams, for lack of a better word. And so in our system, I'm not seeing as every single top flight closed soccer league has ultimately failed, that grants their clubs unlimited opportunities. I mean, can we ever have clubs with the same opportunities as European clubs if we maintain a closed system? And maybe that's out of your purview. I don't know.
Saying because you don't have the same.
Since our system doesn't accommodate, the same kind of clubs, the same kind of unlimited clubs that the European system accommodates, can we ever have clubs that reach that standard in our current system?
That's one thought. I mean, the problem is I'm not sure what would lead. Like, let's say that really, really top flight players were willing to come here. I'm not really sure what incentive would ever lead MLS to bring those sort of players here. I don't know that it's that there's enough money that new money that you would generate,
Yeah.
from bringing someone other than a David Beckham or Thierry Henry or something like that at the end of their career. They're certainly doing great at bringing in sort of names of people, for people who can give the league some sort of presence.
Circus mentality versus soccer mentality, I was just saying.
But like it's not like the U.S. teams have to worry about being able to win in the Champions League, right? So they're happy to play in their little sandbox, and I think that they probably fairly rationally are calculating. If we went out and tried to spend a whole lot of money on really great players, we would be spending a whole lot of money and we wouldn't get that many more fans. We would get some more fans, but we wouldn't get a ton more fans. And
And I think the path to failure in our system is overspending. I think that's been shown
right,
in ASL and all the way back to the 1920s. ASL had some of the same kind of problems.
right,
If you spend too much, parity goes out the window. You get a bunch of cellar dwellers, and one league, like for instance the Cosmos in the 1970s, one team can bring down a league.
right.
I think that's what our system is vulnerable to. That the promotion relegation system is not so much vulnerable to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think from a perspective of growing the league that MLS is doing anything wrong. I mean, if you look compared to other sports leagues, whether it's the NBA or NFL or whoever, I mean, they are growing at a pretty respectable rate, considering where they came from. And I think,
In comparison to other U.S. sports leagues,
right,
I 100% agree.
right, right. So, I mean, I think that they again, it's a question of what their goals are, and I think that it's
And they're allowed to set their goals
right.
out in the current system. Their goals are theirs, and they can set them any way they want. That's the way I
Absolutely.
look at it.
Absolutely, and it's not very well in line with the rest of soccer and the rest of the world, but
Or perhaps American values at large.
or well, values. Sorry, if we're gonna get into whether or not the sports business is aligned with any sort of values, then we're gonna need another half an hour.
I apologize. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, and if you have anything else you want to say, now's the time. I don't want to. I don't want to drag this into a bunch of more esoteric stuff than we absolutely have to.
Oh no, I mean, I think these are all the right questions to be asking, and I think that again, in as much as I'm saying I don't think we're going to see something like promotion and relegation in MLS anytime soon, doesn't mean I don't think it's something we shouldn't be talking about. And the broader question about like values, I make a joke like that, but
Yeah.
obviously we should be talking about what values our sports league should have and what's fair and what's important and what Congress should be doing, even if we don't think they're going to be doing it. I just think it's important to temper our expectations and say, okay, this when we're asking these questions, these are the sort of things we're going to have to be working on for years and decades. To change the way sports operates in our society, because it has developed into a very, very, very powerful industry, and it's not going to give away that power without a fight.
Well, I think talking about promotion and relegation in MLS is a trap. I mean, it's not. That's almost one of those cultural roadblocks where you can't. It doesn't happen in one league anyway. But and by saying that, you grant MLS power that any league in the world doesn't enjoy, which then takes us right back to step one of, well, of course, because American leagues have more power than a lot of leagues in the world because of the entitlements and because of the precedents that have been set. That's the problem, and that's where I get so irascible about it, because so many, when you have the conversation, if there is a cultural component to it, is that people go right to assumptions that closed league assumptions that simply don't occur in open leagues. And I'm not saying you did that, but I'm just saying that's when I get all crazy.
Yep. Well, you can certainly do it in theory, by starting an open league to compete with MLS. But you'd better have an awful lot of money behind you for all the losses you're going to have until it actually gets big enough, right?
Well, and see, for me, it's just like saying that though becomes kind of a question of, it's like asking in a caste system, saying, well, if the lower caste spends enough money, then we'll let them into the upper caste, or when in fact it's the caste system itself that's holding these guys back.
Sure.
But
Well, I guess barring an act of Congress, if you want to just try and go out there and outcompete MLS.
Right.
MLS went into it knowing they were going to lose a lot of money, right? Or at least not make money for a really long time.
In the short term, they wanted to be
In the short term, absolutely. So, I mean, I think that you could certainly build a system that didn't look like MLS, and it might even be more popular than MLS. I don't know, but you know, more popular than MLS is not really a valid business model at this point.
Let's end on that. I
All right.
appreciate it, Neil. I'm gonna read Neil's book. Everybody should go get it. It's Field of Schemes. I'm telling you, the blog and everything else made me really glad to have Neil on. I appreciate it, Neil.
Anytime.